I went to SailGP at the weekend in the grandstands as a regular punter, and what are my thoughts on the event? Well, I think there's still certainly one big thing about the format which needs to change to push it up to the next level. I'm talking about the final sprint race. However, there were other things which I think could be kind of significantly improved for the overall fan experience on the site. And there's one other thing which I think I went with a preconception of and completely changed my mind on, and that was the whole kind of stadium format grandstand. Let's start with the event overall. I just want to say I thought it was superbly run in terms of the organisation of an event. I'm local to Portsmouth. I've been to loads of events on the common on the seafront, and this was just pretty well done, to be honest. Coming in to the entrance to the site with the security checks felt safe but not overbearing. The people doing the tickets on the gate and then welcoming you in the blue SailGP shirts were really friendly and set an excellent tone for the event. Now, one thing that in my head I was pretty sceptical about and thought was a bit of a gimmick is this whole grandstand thing. But in my experience in the past when I've been to these events, the grandstand's been pretty small. I've not paid for it. I've stood like 50 metres away with the exact same view and thought, that's a bit of a gimmick just to get people to pay more. But the tickets here were only grandstands, so it's my only option. I paid for the grandstand pass, went in, and I was actually blown away about how much the elevated view from the truly enormous grandstand really added to experience. I think this was the first time I'd watched a sailing event live where I thought my perspective was better than on the TV. Now, there's lots of great reasons to go to live sailing events, being on the water with your friends, getting the atmosphere in the boat park, seeing the city that it's in. However, I often feel the actual live experience watching the sport side of it, getting into the nitty-gritty, is better on TV. But this was truly the first time where my perspective over the course allowed me to take in everything that was going on the course live as it was happening. And then you also had the live footage kind of playing on the screens as well, which was slight delay and you could kind of pick up pieces too. So I really liked that. I thought it was fantastic and actually thought it was really good value. I did have one gripe with the live viewing experience though, and actually for me it wasn't too bad, but overhearing some of the conversations of the non-sailors, I did feel a bit bad for them that they were missing out, and this was at the start. So we had the feed for the broadcast, which had about a 5-second delay on it, and there were local commentators with the kind of like Tannoy loudspeakers who were counting us into the start, but they were using the countdown from the live feed, which was delayed, so there was a bit of a juxtaposition between that and what you were seeing on the water with the boats coming up to the start. So I just thought this would be an opportunity to get people more engaged in the live action in front of them if the countdown had been based on the actual race timer rather than the broadcast. Equally, I think the fan experience was missing a bit of a trick in that they could have had a 5-minute warning, siren, buzzers going off, and build up that anticipation for the event in the same way you feel it as a sailor. When that 5-minute warning goes, would have been great just to get people back from the beer stalls, get people in their seats. If you weren't switched on to the sailing and looking for the patterns of the boat, you weren't necessarily switched on. I think the starts are basically one of the big selling points of SailGP, so I just think they could have been a little bit better at bringing that grandstand audience into the start, hyping it up from 5 minutes out, sirens, klaxons, the actual start time from the sailors' feed, from the umpires' feed, in big numbers up behind the screen, overbearing, lights going off, that sort of thing to kind of bring you to that start. And then when you were looking at the start line, seeing the boats, you had an amazing view of the start line. I can't tell you how incredible it was. But then you hear the gun go in the race and you can judge for yourself whether you think boats were over or not. Whereas with the delayed feed, that just didn't quite work and could be improved. And now onto the final thing, which I think SailGP kind of needs to fix, and this is the final race sprint format. Now, this has been an issue for the series since day one. Clearly, they want a final race where the winner wins and takes all, and I can see there's loads of reasons for that. And I think even as a sailing fan, we've become more accustomed to that with the formats at the Olympics. However, there's this delicate balance of the, how well someone did, how much the series should count, how much that goes into the final versus the performance in the final. I mean, I'd like to look at the statistics. I don't actually think the boat that leads into the final most often wins the final. I think it's a pretty even split. If I had to hazard a guess and say what was the best determiner for who sails in the final, I'd say it was who had done best on the final day. Often people carry momentum in if they have a late surge on that final day into final, just like New Zealand did on Sunday. So there's a bit of a mix mash there. Also, from a sailing fan, they used to have the two-boat match race final, which often ended up with one boat getting ahead. The match racing score, one boat gets ahead, controls it, and they've kind of fixed it by just throwing another boat in there. And from a sailing fan perspective, I think this breaks down quite a lot, because in terms of the game theory behind it all, the points is like 10 points, 9 points, 8 points. It's just a 1 point gap between these three positions on offer as the prize. And that means if obviously all the boats start the race trying to get ahead at the start to get that lead position. But once the positions are settled in, well, third place is still in last. They've got everything to play for, so they can, do wild things to try and get past and roll the dice. The middle boats position, though, they are basically the risk reward for gaining a position is 1 point, and the risk reward for defending a position is also 1 point. However, it's a lot easier to defend against the boat behind you in apparent win boats than it is to attack. So often I think the second boat just kind of defends against the third boat, and the first boat sails away. And now we actually got a final which wasn't like this. Every boat had the lead, but my perception of it after having watched a lot of finals is that is the dynamic. But the thing that has clinched my opinion about this format failing is actually being in the stands and listening to some of the kind of non-sailors around me. And to be clear, they loved the event. All of them were like so enthused by it, comparing it to, TT races, a lot of comparisons to motorsports. That all said, I felt the final race was a bit of an anti-climax in the stand. So everything that was great about the boat, about the preceding racing, having lots of boats on the start, kind of lots of contentious moments with lots of boats coming in. I'm talking about that Australia penalty. That was kind of lost from the final. So people were watching something which was supposed to be the climax, and it is in terms of how much it matters for the result, but in terms of what you're seeing with your eyes, it's actually a step down in spectacle from the preceding races. What would I do to fix this? And you can tell me if you think this is a good idea or not. But one format I would like to see them try, I know they've been trialling some different formats for the next seasons with more boats, but what I'd like them to try is a elimination race, or devil. So if you've watched much track cycling, you'll know this, but basically every few laps there's a sprint, and the boat that finishes last on that lap is eliminated from the race. Now I think this could be a really good format for sailing, because I think it would allow you to take more boats through to the final. So I think it would be still good to eliminate some after the main fleet racing, but you could take 7-8 boats through to the final, and then basically to give a significance to the rest of the series for this final, I think you start in order of your overall your series position from the weekend, your Grand Prix position from the weekend. But effectively what this would do is put the fleet into a grid position going through the start line, and then every lap you eliminate the last boat. And I think this would work particularly well for SailGP and modern sport for several reasons. First of all, I feel like even I consume a lot of sport on Instagram, Facebook Reels, TikTok, and you're watching, short clips. And an elimination every lap gives you, I don't know how many boats you're going to take in the final, but I think you would take maybe 10 boats or 8 boats into the final, and you would have, say 5 eliminations or 6 eliminations, but you'd leave the last 3 just to loop round and actually finish the race 1, 2, 3 for the podium. But it would give you, for each boat eliminated, a captured moment which is canned, ready for those clips. Boats coming in, who's going to be eliminated, a boat having to sail off the course to the side once they've been chucked out, it being announced on the tannoy system. I think it would give the commentators a clear narrative to focus on. They've got the race for first going on kind of all the time, and it's slowly getting closer and closer to focus as we're eliminating boats, but it gives you those kind of like micro moments in the race as boats are eliminated to focus on as well, and it all draws you towards the leader. I also think there would be a significant advantage if the first boat started first, for them to retain that position, so that it would benefit those boats who have a good series beforehand. And I think you could tweak the starting procedure to give a good enough chance for boats behind to overtake. So you comment below if you think that's a good idea, or comment if you have another idea for the final race, because at the moment I think visually for the non-sailors it's not kind of working, because it's not as much of a spectacle as the preceding racing. And I think for the sailors, for me, kind of thinking more about race strategy and the way the points are, again, I just don't think the ingredient is there to give people incentive to race for the overall win. Just the way the points are worked out and the way generally sailing works, dynamics with dirty wind. Yeah, let me know what you thought about the weekend. Let me know what you thought about my idea for the race format. And yeah, let me know if you think I should cover more SailGP.